This is True News, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help us God. Russia's preparations for nuclear war are advancing at an alarming pace, but few Americans are aware of the danger. Even worse, most of the people who do know about it are not bothered by the rising risk of a catastrophic war involving weapons of mass destruction. Doc Burkhart and I will provide you with a comprehensive report on World War III. We begin today's True News with a tweet from the Russian allied military commander in Donetsk, one of the Ukrainian regions annexed by Russia this year during the war. And so here's the tweet.
And so it's saying here in a rare admission on state TV, Donetsk militia commander Alexander Kozelsk suggests that Russia lacks the conventional means to win the war. His conclusion, but we have nuclear weapons for that. We created them for such situations. That is why there is only one option. We do have video of that interview from Russian television. Let's take a look at it.
Вы знаете, мы понимаем вот наш потенциал на сегодня. У нас есть ряд частей, которые выводятся на ротацию для восстановления на территории Российской Федерации по местам постоянной дислокации. Есть сейчас формируемые и формирующиеся батальоны. Вот, например, сейчас на фронт выдвигается батальон Урал-1, который был сформирован в Екатеринбурге. Это порядка 1500 человек, где 95% это практически штурмовики, ребята очень высокомотивированные. Их обеспечили не только там бронежилетами и касками, их обеспечили и бронетехникой обеспечивали, и транспортными средствами бронированными, такими как «Тайфун», обеспечили. То есть подготовка внутри России идет. Но тем не менее мы понимаем, что наши ресурсы, они, конечно, имеют свои пределы. И следующий виток эскалации может быть только один — ядерный. Потому что если, например, страны НАТО перейдут какие-то границы, они сейчас уже настолько себя фривольно чувствуют, когда откровенно рассказывают, как руководители военного ведомства Германии, о том, что вот сейчас хорошо бы испытать в полевых условиях наших кошек, так, леопардов, посмотреть, как они будут бить русских, то говорить о том, что они сейчас просто тихо поставляют какое-то вооружение, продают, нельзя, это уже прямое участие. То есть, соответственно, осталась уже какая-то самая малость для того, чтобы перейти эту красную черту. Поэтому все понимают, что следующий виток эскалации — это будет только уже ядерный этап этой войны. И насколько Запад готов сейчас к развитию этой ситуации таким образом, я думаю, что не готов, потому что они акцентируют внимание постоянно на том, что ни в коем случае этого нельзя допустить. Но они уже приблизились к порогу своих возможностей. Дальше, за этой красной чертой, уже просто разговор должен быть совсем другой. У нас нет возможности, мы страна, которая сейчас воюет против всего западного мира, и мы не имеем таких ресурсов, чтобы общевойсковыми средствами победить там блок НАТО. Но у нас для этого есть ядерное вооружение, мы его создавали специально для таких ситуаций. Поэтому вариант только один.
Doc, that's what the Russian people watched on television yesterday.
Right, on their Fox News, on their CNN. That's what they're watching.
A primetime discussion of it's time to use the nukes. Because what he's saying is we're fighting the entire Western world. We're fighting NATO. And they are dangerously close to crossing the red lines that Russia has drawn. And there's only one thing that we can do: bring out the nukes. And he said the West is prepared for this war, that they are in preparation for a nuclear war. And I believe he's right. I believe the West is pushing Russia to use nukes. And you know, we're only 2 weeks away. Well, what? Yeah, about a week and a half away, 2 weeks away from Christmas.
Yes.
And you know my concern about Christmas. I have never, ever, in the years of this ministry, seen the danger at this level. And for me personally, Christmas is the very anxious time, because the Holy Spirit gave prophetic dreams to members of my family around 2010 through 2012, a series of dreams. And in all those dreams, there was fire, there was war. And the one common theme in all the dreams was Christmas. There were Christmas trees, there were parties, there were decorations. And if you go back to those years of 2010, 11, 12, you can listen to me on TruNews saying, I am convinced that when America is in a nuclear war, it will be Christmas time. That's why I'm concerned right now. We're here today. What is the date, the 12th?
Today's the 14th, Rick.
14th,
Yes.
December 14th. And we're talking about nuclear war. You and I are. Nobody else is. The Russians are talking about it.
Right.
But in America, nobody's talking about it.
It occasionally comes up in conversation on Tucker Carlson, but it's not the main topic of concern. So it certainly never comes up on other news, even on everybody's favorite Fox program. No one talks about nuclear war on Fox, on CNN.
None of the radio news talk show hosts, none of the podcasters, nobody talks about it.
And even those that are considered, you know, on the right, you got the OANs, you got Real America's Voice, you've got all these on that side. No one is talking about the possibility of nuclear war. And we are closer to that now than we've ever been. But maybe people have just become so desensitized and calloused about it. You know, we get entertained by nuclear war on TV and in the movies and everything. It entertains us. It's not real to us.
This isn't going to be entertainment. I will show you what else is going on in Russia today. So this is a message posted on Telegram by Dmitry Medvedev. This is his response to the news that the United States will be shipping Patriot missile batteries and missiles to Ukraine.
Yeah, and Mr. Medvedev, not at a loss for words at all. He says, if, as Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, hinted, delivers Patriot complexes to Kiev fanatics together with NATO personnel, they will immediately become a legitimate target of our armed forces. I hope the Atlantic impotents understand this. And so this is another one of the red lines that Dmitry Medvedev, and he said this back on the 29th of November, Rick.
Yes, but
okay, so
he's saying the Patriots will immediately become a target.
Yes.
Immediately. The moment they touch down in Ukraine, they are a target.
And the reason why, because they become an immediate threat to Moscow right then. And it crosses a red line for the Russians. Now, we have this story from the Mirror. Russia a new nuclear threat to West by readying their missiles capable of striking UK and the US. Today, Russia put in place its nuclear threat against the West by showily readying a Yars strategic missile for combat use at a location southwest of Moscow. A video shows the installation of the enormous rocket into a silo at the Kozelsk military compound in the Kaluga region. Russia is building up to more nuclear showboating in preparation for the annual Strategic Missiles Forces Day on December 17th. The Yars intercontinental ballistic missile with a 7,500-mile range was installed in a silo launch pad using a special transport and loading unit. We can show a little bit of that video if we want to, and we'll talk some more about this particular article. So this is this particular missile being loaded up into the silo outside of Moscow. Right. With a 7,500-mile range, that means it has the capability to reach the U.S. It didn't have to fly quite as far to get to the UK. It takes about 4 minutes to get to the UK. It takes about 9 minutes to get to the US. But they're making sure that the West sees this. And if they're loading the silo, they're preparing to use the silo. Now, it took several hours for the complicated technological operations to be installed. The division commander, Colonel Alexei Sokolov, explained that the exercise was meant to send a message to the West, as both the U.S. and the U.K. were within range. He said the importance of this operation lies in the fact that the next missile will be put on combat duty on schedule. So they're not making any, lack of warning to the West. If you continue on this path, leaders in the West, in the U.S. and U.K., understand that we are not going to hold back. We are ready to use the weapons that we have because you threaten the future of Russia.
It would be like a person putting a clip in a gun and saying, I want you to see this. I'm not going to use it today. I want you to watch me load. I just put a clip in this gun. Do you understand what I'm doing? The next one that goes in, I'm going to use it. That's what the Russians said today.
Well, and that's not the only show of force that they had. Putin's nuclear bombers take flight and show force as Russia readies nuke missiles to strike the West. Vladimir Putin sent up nuclear bombers today in the first known patrol since his strategic fleet was hit by a Ukrainian drone attack 9 days ago. The Russian dictator, the Sun's words there, ordered 2 Tu-95 MS planes known as Bears to take to the skies over the Sea of Japan in a show of firepower. A video showed the 2 nuke bombers in the sky accompanied by Su-30SM and Su-35S escorts. Those Tu-95s, those are nuclear bombers. Okay, so once again, they're saying to the West or to anyone that would encroach upon Russian territory or the future of Russia, we're ready to deliver in defense of our nation. But once again, no one in the West is talking about this. No one in the West is worried about it. If we were living in the 1960s, this would be the headline. This would be, the #1 story every night.
People would be going into bomb shelters.
And building bomb shelters. And so, but it doesn't seem to bother people in the West. There's like they're in a daze.
They are
right?
in a daze, and they're going to watch their pornography tonight. Doc, that's where it's at. Their sin, their addiction to sin has blinded them to the danger of sin.
And just as in the days of Noah, they were so caught up in every kind of evil that man could come up with. Not that the devil could come up with, but that man could come up with. And man can come up with a lot more creative evil than the devil can.
By the way, Pornhub released their stats today. I saw it on the London Daily Mail. Okay, so I don't normally read porn stats, but it was a major story on the Daily Mail. And Doc, the states in America where people watch pornography the longest per session were all Southern, Bible Belt, Republican, MAGA states.
Right, I can believe that.
Okay.
I can believe that.
It means the people who claim to be Christians and patriots are the most addicted to pornography.
I can believe that.
And they have no conviction about this, about why the country is in trouble.
Well, and how can they have any kind of deliverance or anything when you have well-known evangelical leaders that confess to watching porn themselves and celebrate it? You don't hear any preaching against pornography, that's for sure. Why? Because, and your son Jeremy knows this very clearly, there's so many pastors that are addicted to porn, too.
So all right, the addiction is there, and people need to know that they can be set free of it. The reason I'm bringing it up is that the southern states that are supposed to be Bible Belt states,
right,
Republican voting, conservative, patriotic, Trump-supporting MAGA states, are the states that are watching the most porn. All right. The country is, America is addicted to sin. And their addiction to sin is blinding them to the danger of their sin. And people need to snap out of it right away. You just need to snap out of it. We're facing a nuclear attack. Do you want to be watching a porn movie when the flashes go off from the nuclear explosions in your city? mean, you better, whatever sin you're involved, whether it's fornication, adultery, homosexuality, thievery, drunkenness, whatever it is, snap out of it. Snap out of it. There are going to be people involved in their sin on the minute that the Russian nukes explode.
And just like people were in their sin when the flood came.
Yes. And it washed them away. It washed them away. And Jesus said, it shall be as in the days of Noah when he returns. They'll be eating and drinking, marrying. They're going to be just doing business as usual. And sudden destruction shall come upon them. There's not a secret pre-trib rapture. And you go, oh, wow, the Christians disappeared. We got 7 years to clean up our act.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's not the way it is, okay? It's sudden destruction. It's life is normal, and suddenly it comes to a stop. Just absolute screeching halt, and Christ has appeared. That's where we're dangerously close right now. And we don't know, Doc, if there is a war, a nuclear war, between Russia and the United States and China and the United States, we don't know how long the world continues to go on after that war.
That's true. We don't know. I mean, there have been wars in the past, and it looked like we were leading up to the end of the ages at those times, too. We don't know beyond that.
We don't know. So the world could continue. It will continue without the USA.
Yes.
This will just be a mound of smoke rising and uninhabitable for a long time, that nobody can come to North America and dwell on the soil. That may be where we're headed. But I know this, I have never seen the danger level at where it's at right now, this day in December of 2022. And very few people in this country are aware of it. That's what just baffles me, that there's apathy. I mean, you know, we got kicked off a Christian television station earlier this year.
Because we talked about World War III.
We said there could be a nuclear war by December. In fact, I told a TV airtime broker today, I said, hey, would you call Mrs. So-and-so at that network, the one who insisted that I be kicked off? I said, why don't you call her today and tell her to look at the news? She needs to see it. She needs to repent for what she did. She kicked me off a Christian television network because I told her audience, if this nation does not repent, we could be in a nuclear war by Christmas. Well, it's almost Christmas.
Right. And our nation still hasn't repented yet either.
No. And these TARS broadcasting networks. Oh my gosh, that's TBN. I didn't even think about that.
We're talking about the parable of the TARS,
the TARS broadcasting network. All right, that's not the one that kicked me off. Okay, it was another one. Okay, it was TCT. Yeah. TCT kicked us off because we said there could be a nuclear war by December. Okay, I will stand in front of God on Judgment Day, and that man and woman at that network that run it, they too will stand before God that day. And how do you explain to God, you were running a Christian television network and you removed a preacher who told people to repent because there could be a nuclear war? How do you explain that? What's your answer to God? Well, quite frankly, I don't think you get a chance to give an answer. I think the judgment's done by the time you get there. Because you're sealing your fate in this life.
Yes.
By the time you stand in front of God, your fate's already sealed. You don't get a chance to plead your case. You're not going to have a defense attorney there or public defender. When you arrive in front of God, your eternal destiny has already been decided.
That's right. You don't get a chance, second chance.
And you're doing it now in this life. You decide in this life where you're going to be in the next life. And that's why so a lot of people think, well, you know, I'm sure I'll be able to state my case to God. I was a good person. I meant well. That's not going to sell. You don't even get a chance to state that argument. It's not a trial. It's a sentencing hearing.
That's right.
You arrive either guilt-free or guilty. Those are the two. And you don't get to make a case. You either walk in to the courtroom on Judgment Day already found not guilty because the blood of Christ is on you, or you walk in before God marked guilty. But you do not get a case. You do not get an opportunity to state your case before God.
It's too late at that point.
Maybe back to the nuclear war stuff.
Well, in this delusion leading to war is one of the things that causes all sorts of confusion. So while they're arming Ukraine, while NATO and the West are arming Ukraine, they're also shorting themselves and being able to defend their own countries. It's so crazy. This is from Modern Diplomacy. Joseph Borrell confesses our military stockpiles have been depleted. Now, who's Joseph Borrell? Well, he's the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission. And he confesses that the Ukrainian war has been a wake-up call for all of us about he's speaking about European military capabilities. He said, we have given weapons to Ukraine, but in so doing, we realize that our military stockpiles have been depleted. With conventional war returning to the heart of Europe, we also realize that we are lacking critical defense capabilities to be able to protect ourselves from a higher level of threats on the European continent itself. It's almost like someone planned to disarm Europe. Rick?
It's hard for me to believe that somebody in a position that high can be that dumb. It's almost like deliberate dumb. Like, if I were that dumb, I wouldn't go out and hold a press conference and tell the whole world, hey, we got ourselves in a war and we gave away all of our weapons.
Right.
Daggone, we don't have anything left to fight this war with.
It's like somebody, imagine here in Florida, they put a sign in their front yard saying, we got rid of all of our guns.
Is the guy really that stupid? Or is he playing rope-a-dope?
Oh, you mean trying to get Russia in to?
Does he want the Russians to believe, hey, they don't have any weapons left; they're out of ammo? Is he playing rope-a-dope, or is he a dope? Which one is it?
Well, Newsweek is also running along the same line as far as shortage of arms and weapons, and this is becoming, they say in this particular article, a significant challenge to both NATO and Ukraine. The Center for, the story goes on to say that here, as Newsweek reported it, is that they've given up so many of their weapons to Ukraine. They depleted their own sources, but Ukraine's using up all these weapons too.
And they want more.
Yeah, and they want more.
And it's wintertime. And Russia has Ukraine where they wanted them by winter. And if this is true, the West is running out of weapons as the winter sets in Ukraine, which is not good for Zelensky. Now, Doc, this Newsweek article mentioned a video podcast that was recorded by the Center for Strategic and International Studies as a neocon think tank. And the podcast is Smart Women, Smart Power. It was hosted by Ambassador Julianne Smith, U.S. permanent representative to NATO. Well, she was the guest.
Yes.
And the podcast host was Dr. Kathleen McGinnis, who is a senior fellow in the International Security Program, director of the Smart Women, Smart Power Initiative. And so they had this discussion about the war, and we clipped out this segment where they're talking about how quickly the weapon supply is being depleted in the NATO nations. This is several minutes long. Let's watch it.
International defense industrial cooperation will be necessary to replenish stocks, munitions, systems that have been sent to Ukraine by the allies. I'd love your view on those conversations. Where are they today? How are we thinking about that problem of supplies of munitions and industrial capacity across the alliance?
This is a very serious challenge, both for NATO allies that are giving serious commitment, significant military assistance, lethal assistance to the Ukrainian military forces, but it is a significant challenge for the Ukrainian military forces themselves that are facing shortfalls and declining stockpiles. So in essence, what has happened over the last couple of weeks and months is that 3 separate efforts have gotten underway. So you have the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, the UDCG, which is a U.S.-led effort to coordinate lethal assistance going into Ukraine. That group, which is about 50 nations, it's not just NATO allies, it actually includes friends in the Indo-Pacific that are all supporting Ukraine. They're beginning to look at the question of declining stockpiles inside Ukraine. And they meet monthly. They're bringing in industry and trying to determine how they can send the right signals to industry to give them the assurance they need to reopen production lines. And so that's the team that's taking on Ukraine. In Brussels, there's 2 separate efforts. At NATO proper, we have convened what is called the CNAD. It's a group of armaments directors that come together from all 30 countries. They meet with industry. They're also trying to look at things like multinational buys, pooled purchases, things that you and I worked on many years ago at CSIS. All of those ideas are back in the mix because you want to send industry the strongest signal possible. So again, they have the confidence that when they turn one of these production lines back on, there'll be sustained interest. And so that effort is focused on declining stockpiles across the NATO alliance. For a country like Estonia that has given an enormous amount of security assistance to Ukraine, they're facing some very real shortfalls, and they're not alone. We see that across the alliance writ large. Separately, the European Union, an organization that has also become much more directly engaged in providing lethal assistance to Ukraine, has started its own effort to also address EU member states that are facing declining stockpiles. And the key here is to find some connective tissue and make sure that the EU and NATO are talking to each other in some of these efforts and not sending mixed signals to industry. But the good news is that lots of flowers are blooming here as it relates to this particular challenge. And the hope is that in the months ahead, these institutions, the EU and NATO, and the group of countries meeting in the contact group can work with industry to ensure that they have the confidence to up production and increase production as soon as humanly possible.
These people talk about war
Like it's a budget meeting.
Yeah. Like they're planning the sale of Girl Scout cookies.
Right.
They're talking about lethal weapons.
Yeah, did you hear her say lethal assistance? Lethal assistance.
So you're a killer.
That's what lethal means. You're killing something. Meanwhile, in Russia, they're in total war production mode. Over in the EU and NATO, they're trying to run a war by committee, if you believe that that's what they're doing.
So, Doc, if it's correct, NATO is out of ammo, out of weapons, out of missiles, out of everything you need to fight a conventional war, then you only have one thing left.
Unconventional war.
Nuclear,
Yes.
biological, chemical. If they're telling the truth, then they're down to using weapons of mass destruction.
Well, we know that the U.S. isn't out of weapons.
No.
And we know Russia isn't out of weapons. So the only place that's left that's running out of weapons is Europe.
So did the U.S. deliberately deplete the European military stockpiles?
To be totally dependent on the U.S.
Yes.
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, it really is.
And they're trying to bleed out Russia. That's a strategy, bleed out Russia and the European Union, and then later take on China. That's what I'm seeing looks like the strategy that's underway. Because you're right, the U.S. isn't out of weapons, but NATO is. The European countries are out of weapons. Angela Merkel, the former chancellor of Germany, made an interesting admission recently, and she said the Minsk agreements were meant to give Ukraine time. Now, before I go into this article, I want to skip down to number 22, guys, in control room, because I want to explain what the Minsk agreements are.
So now, the Minsk agreements were a series of international agreements which sought to end the Donbas war fought between armed Russian separatist groups and armed forces of Ukraine, with Russia regular forces playing a central part. Now, that first, known as the Minsk Protocol, was drafted in 2014 by the Trilateral Contact Group on Ukraine, consisting of Ukraine, Russia, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, with mediation by the leaders of France and Germany in the so-called Normandy format. Now, amid rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine in early 2022, Russia officially recognized the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics on February 2022. And then following that decision, on the 22nd, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared that the Minsk agreements no longer existed and that Ukraine, not Russia, was to blame for their collapse. Russia then invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February.
Okay, so we go back 2014.
Right.
Remember what the U.S. had pulled off in Ukraine prior to 2014, a revolution.
Right.
The U.S. with John McCain, Victoria Nuland, Obama, Hillary Clinton, that whole gang.
We basically took over Ukraine.
They took over Ukraine.
Remember, they were even putting people in government positions that couldn't even speak Russian or Ukrainian.
That's right.
So,
and so John McCain encouraged the people to overthrow the democratically elected Ukrainian government. We overthrew democracy.
yes.
John McCain was a threat to democracy. Victoria Nuland was a threat to democracy. And the U.S. orchestrated a revolution in Ukraine that brought down the government that the Ukrainian people had elected. And then the U.S. installed this puppet regime. And now that puppet regime is led by Zelensky. And you got a bunch of Nazis running the Ukrainian military, wearing their swastikas and their SS insignia on their uniforms, the real Nazis.
Yes.
So the Minsk agreements were agreed upon with Russia and Ukraine and the European countries in 2014 to work out a way to prevent a war in Ukraine.
At least that was
the purpose.
What they were told.
That's right. So this year in February, Vladimir Putin declared the Minsk agreements are over. They've been violated. Ukraine has violated them. NATO has violated them. We're not recognizing the Minsk agreements anymore. We're going to war. That's what happened in February of this year. Now we go back to Angela Merkel.
Right.
Let's go back to that headline, number 17. Merkel said the Minsk agreements were meant to give Ukraine time. Time to do what?
To prepare for war.
To prepare for war.
Yes.
She said it. She admitted it. Now let's let's look at some of the quotes.
So the Minsk Accords were signed to give Ukraine time to strengthen itself. And that's according to ex-German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who was in office from 2005 to 2021. And she said this in an interview published on Wednesday in the Zeit newspaper. This was last week.
All right, so Doc, right here, what she's saying is we deceived Russia. We deliberately deceived Russia. We pretended that we wanted peace. And we went into these negotiations never intending to have peace.
Right.
We only fooled Russia long enough to arm Ukraine.
So what was going on at the time? Ukrainian armed forces were in daily battles in the mainly Russian provinces of Ukraine.
And their Nazi-led army was being trained by NATO nations like Canada.
Right. And so, but they were escalating things so fast that it looked like Russia at that time was ready to make a move on Ukraine. At that point, I mean, they were ready. And yet, they worked out the agreements and everything. Fast forward now to 2022, and this is where you've had 8 years to give Ukraine time to get as many weapons as they can to make some sort of challenge to Russia. Merkel said that the 2014 Minsk agreement was an attempt to give time to Ukraine. It also used this time to become stronger, as can be seen today. The Ukraine of 2014-2015 is not the modern Ukraine.
So the post-revolution Ukraine, when they got the regime imposed in Ukraine in 2014, that's not the same Ukraine that we have today, because we've made it stronger. We have built up the Nazi army. Now, Angela Merkel would know a lot about the Nazi army.
Yeah, she had her own uniform.
Yeah. So, and she was in the Communist Party. So she knows a lot, and she was in charge of youth propaganda. She was in charge of it in East Germany. She was in charge of youth propaganda. The old gal, has been in this game for a long time, of deceiving, of using propaganda, of making people believe you mean one thing when you really mean something else. So what she admitted to was, we fooled the Russians.
Yes. And she admitted that. She said, according to her, it was clear to everyone that the conflict had been put on hold, noting that the issue had not been settled. Yet this was what gave Ukraine invaluable time. She voiced out that the NATO states could not have supported Kiev to the level that they do today at that time. Now, Merkel was the German chancellor when Ukraine's state coup happened in 2014, and the Minsk Accords on resolving the Donbas war were signed with her contribution.
And I bet if you talk to Lavrov and Medvedev and Putin today, they would say, we wish we never had signed those agreements. We know that we got snookered, and we gave them 8 years to prepare for this war.
Yes. And the map of Eastern Europe would probably look a lot different right now.
Yeah. Because this level of fighting would not be taking place if Russia had made a move on Ukraine in 2014, right after that revolution. Next one. This is an interesting German news article. On Monday of this week, Germany consumed 1% of its stored natural gas. In one day, 24 hours.
Right.
It went through 1% of the natural liquefied gas that has been stored up for this winter.
That's right, Rick. According to the Federal Network Agency, Germany consumes too much gas. And most recently, a full percentage point of the stored gas was lost just on Monday. Now, that should remain an outlier, said the agency's president, Klaus Mueller, on Wednesday in the ZDF Morgan magazine. Therefore, despite the cold, my request, be careful with gas consumption. Mueller said December could be one of the coldest in the past 10 years. As a result, industry and households did not achieve the goal of consuming 20% less gas than usual. The fact that Germany exports electricity from gas-fired power plants to France is also contributing to this as well.
So if it's just a normal winter and they want you to cut your consumption in your house by 20%, it's just a normal winter, all right? Even that's going to be painful because you're going to be cold in your house.
Right.
20% reduction in winter time. But when it's the coldest winter in 10 years, and they're still asking you to cut your energy consumption, now it's really cold in your house. And moms and dads are looking at their children. They're going over to their parents, their elderly parents' homes. They're asking, do you have a blanket, Mom? Mom, are your feet still freezing? Okay. You're going to have to wear more socks, okay? Do you really think the German people are going to cut back?
Yeah, they'll make sweaters a patriotic symbol, and then heavy coats at some point. So now, according to Mueller, a lack of gas and turning off of gas lines is not imminent. We are very, very far away from that, said the head of the agency. The reservoirs are more than 92% full. But I would remind him it's December 14th. 1, 2, 3 weeks when it gets cold and we consume more, we can easily endure that. But that shouldn't continue in January and February.
Okay, so
he's a weather forecaster too.
Yes, so let's stop right there. The tanks are at 92% of LNG.
Right.
On Monday of this week, the nation used 1% of its supply in one day. So, if they continue at that rate, in 92 days, Germany has no gas.
That puts them at the middle of March.
Right.
And it's still not that warm in March.
Well, not only is it not, it's still chilly, but you're completely out of gas, and there's no place to get any more.
Right.
You used your reserve. What they have right now is
their
emergency reserves. When it's used up, whether it's January, February, March, or April, it doesn't matter. Because when it's used up, there's no more gas. Why? Because NATO blew up the Russian pipeline. Well, I'll say NATO. Let's say, as Putin says, the Anglo-Saxons.
Right. And then put sanctions on everything else. So the only one that's paying the price on the sanctions are countries like Germany and France, or the people of Germany and France.
So when Germany's natural gas runs out this winter or this spring, let's say they make it till spring. They dodge a bullet. They get all the way through the winter and it's in the spring. Now the gas tanks of the entire country are empty. There's no place to go to fill them up for the rest of 2023. And what are you going to do in the winter of 23 and 24? What are you going to do? There's no reserves this time. How are they going to take care of their people? Doc, this is a disaster. And then the winter of 24, 25. In the winter of 25, 26.
The next 10 winters, and we've talked about that.
They said 10 winters. And if you're living in Europe, you ought to be outraged that your incompetent politicians brought you to this level of suffering. There is no justification for it. Absolutely no justification that the European people are going to suffer this year and for years to come because Western globalists had a plan to go to war with Russia. And it's backfired. And now the European people are suffering. And the Russians they're not going to shiver this winter.
No.
The Russians have plenty of gas. They're not shivering.
Right, and right now, Russia is experiencing record cold temperatures right now. But they've got all the energy that they need to manage through it. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was a report the other day, they're in Siberia, minus 71 degrees Fahrenheit. Minus 71 degrees. One of the lowest temperatures ever recorded. Now, that's what's happening in Siberia right now. And some of those cold waves are coming into Europe as well. And so,
well, Doc, there are European leaders, business leaders, who have figured out what's happened. And one of them is the CEO of an Austrian energy company.
Right. This is Werner Steinecker, and he just says, you know, all this talk about cheap gas after the war, it's simply an illusion. And this is the outgoing Austrian energy CEO, says energy prices will remain high for the foreseeable future. That this article explains who is behind this. It says the U.S. will continue to keep EU gas prices high as long-term 20-year take-or-pay contracts are in place. Let that soak in. The U.S. is going to be keeping the control of EU gas prices.
For 2 decades.
Right. We got it down in writing. That's coming from Werner Steinecker, the outgoing CEO of Austrian energy concern Energy AG.
Doc, he's saying that these contracts are in place.
For 20 years. And he says, even if the war ends, let's say the war ends today, energy will not become much cheaper. There is no need to have illusions about this. Even in peaceful Europe, gas will no longer be as cheap as before. Europe buys liquefied gas from the United States in the long term, expensive and take or pay for 20 years. In any case, you will have to pay for it, he said in an interview with the news outlet Nachrichten.
And up until a couple months ago, Europe was getting cheap gas from Russia.
Right.
Flowing through a pipeline that somebody blew up. And now there's no more cheap gas. There's only expensive gas that's going to be brought over on tankers across the Atlantic Ocean. And they're locked into a 20-year contract. Take it or leave it.
Right.
You want to be cold or do you want to pay the price? For the next 20 years.
And he didn't hold back on further comments either. He said, according to him, now the United States is interested in the continuation of hostilities, since they make money on LNG, weaken Russia, make money on weapons, and prevent the rapprochement between Russia and Europe.
Oh my gosh, this man understands it.
Yes, he's got it down.
Let's go back to that. Look at the things that he said. The United States wants the war to continue, because they're making money on liquefied natural gas.
Number one.
They want to weaken Russia. They want to make more money on war weapons, and they want to prevent Europe and Russia from making peace.
Yes.
In other words, he's saying it is the policy of American leaders to make people suffer so that they become richer. There's a place in hell for these kind of people, Doc. There's a really hot place in Hades for people like this. You made people suffer. You made human beings. You made the poor, the elderly, the children suffer so you could get rich. You made people bleed. You made people die on battlefields. You caused destruction. You caused suffering and want so you could become fat and rich. They will burn in the hottest places of the lake of fire. These are the scoundrels that Jesus Christ hunts down, and they run into the caves.
That's right.
And beg the rocks to fall on them. That's who these people are. He's coming for them on Judgment Day. I'm going to get you, you scoundrel. I watched what you did to the people. You caused bloodshed and suffering so you could become fat and rich. Man, Judgment Day is going to be terrible for those people. It is going to be horrible for those people. And they will be placed in the worst places. They will suffer an excruciating punishment, Doc, that will have no end. No end. And God will forget that he even put them there. He'll just erase his mind. Gone. They'll be screaming in the lake of fire, and God won't even remember he made them. It's the worst hell to be in. I can't imagine anything worse than that. Not that you're screaming and they won't come and help you, but they can't hear you and they don't even know you existed. That's so unthinkable. But that's where these people are going to be. And they will be there for eternity. and eternity is a long, long time. It has no end. And the lake of fire has no exits. It doesn't have any suburbs. It doesn't have any parks. It doesn't have any golf courses.
And your friends will be there, but you won't be able to hang out with them because they'll be burning too.
They'll all be screaming together. All of them together. They have a way to repent now. They have time to repent now and to save themselves from that kind of destruction. That's the only thing that's on my mind, is to reach people and tell them, believe on the name of Jesus Christ and be baptized. You do not want to face the wrath of God on Judgment Day. While we're on the topic of World War III, I went over to the Asian newspaper, South China Morning Post in Hong Kong. Wow, what do we find today, Doc? Record 18 PLA bombers enter Taiwan's air defense zone in the latest practice run.
Right, so this is a significant increase. What we're seeing, Rick, Beijing has sent a record 18 bombers into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, keeping up the pressure as cross-strait tensions remain high over the island's close ties with the U.S. Observers have said continued sea and air combat drills by the People's Liberation Army around Taiwan appeared to be practice runs for a future blockade or attack. The article mentioned about the increase in tension since Nancy Pelosi went on her little jaunt over there back a few months ago.
That was her purpose.
Right. And
she gave China the cover to begin stepping up their patrols.
So a total of 29 PLA warplanes and 3 warships were detected around Taiwan in the 24 hours on Tuesday. The island's defense ministry said of these, an unprecedented 18 H-6 bombers and 1 J-11 fighter jet entered Taiwan's southwestern air defense zone. A Y-8 anti-submarine and a Y-8 tactical reconnaissance aircraft also crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait, according to the ministry statement, which included a PLA flight path chart. Now, what's significant about that is China never crossed the median line before this past summer. They would go right up to it, they'd fly all the way, but now they're crossing the median line.
Thanks to Nancy Pelosi.
That's right. And so now we're going to continue to see an escalation. They're going to move a little closer. They're going to be doing more and more drills.
And every time they go across the line, the pilots shout, "Where's Nancy?"
Yes. So
I mean, that line worked for the Democrats there for a couple of weeks, Doc. So why not use it now with the Chinese military? Where's Nancy? Because Nancy's little antics, I believe, was coordinated with Beijing. I believe she coordinated it. I believe she's part of it.
Oh, I don't doubt it at all. I mean, we know the Democratic Party is just the Chinese arm of the Communist Party. So,
Doc, when I was in Jordan a week ago, I don't know if we talked about this. I remember reading this article, but I don't recall if we talked about it. I'm talking about the Dutch article.
Yes.
Did we talk about it?
No, we haven't talked about it yet. We talked about the New Zealand version of this a couple of months ago. But they are trying to shut down farming, basically, in the Netherlands.
They're going to seize their farms. They're going to seize the farms.
Right. So
3,000 farms are going to be foreclosed on by the government.
So the Dutch government is offering to buy out up to 3,000, what they're calling peak polluter farms and major industrial polluters, in an attempt to reduce ammonia and nitrogen oxide emissions that are illegal under EU law. The nitrogen minister, maybe she gets a cape and everything.
She's the minister of nitrogen.
Yes. So Christiane van der Waal said farmers would be offered more than 100% of the value of their farms to quit. And for the first time, the government has said that forced buyouts will follow next year if the voluntary measures fail.
The Dutch government is going to confiscate thousands of farms for the radical green agenda.
Right.
Because cows belch.
Right.
And this article, and I think, I don't know if we have, yes, it does say it here in a minute, because they plan to get rid of livestock. And we said that a year ago.
Right.
They said, what was it, was that COP meeting, was that in Paris? Remember the one where Prince Charles spoke last year? And we said, as we were analyzing the things that were being said at that conference, that summit, they've made a decision to get rid of livestock.
Right. And we talked here a little while back in New Zealand how they're taxing sheep and cows and stuff.
$2,500 fine
Right.
of tax on every head of livestock in New Zealand.
Now, this group of 2,000 to 3,000 peak polluters, who are mostly farmers, an agricultural ministry spokesperson told The Guardian, will be offered a final set of choices: innovate to drastically reduce emissions, transition to a new kind of business, extend ways that reduce their impact, relocate, or, quote, voluntarily stop, unquote. In other words, they're going to come at gunpoint and take it away from you. That's what it means.
What did the communists do?
You're going to volunteer to stop.
What did the Stalinists do? What did the communists do when, after the Jewish Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and it became the Soviet Union? What did they do to the farms?
They confiscated them.
And what are they going to do to the farms in the Netherlands?
They're confiscating them.
In 2023, they're going to confiscate farms. This isn't, you know, we laughed at the radical green activists for years. We just laughed at them. We thought they're funny, okay?
But now they're in power.
They're deadly serious. And they're going to confiscate private property now to enforce their agenda. So you're going to have collective farms in Europe. Collectives.
Yes.
That's what they were called in the Soviet Union. Collectives. The state will own the farms. But where they're really going is that there will be no farming. None whatsoever. They're going to destroy farming. And you're going to eat bugs.
And like it.
Yep. You're going to eat bugs, and you're going to eat laboratory-made meat. You're going to eat whatever trash they push on you, and you'll have no ability to grow food on your own.
It would be illegal to grow food. Think about that.
They're going to make it illegal to grow food. That's the agenda. And you well, no, they wouldn't do that. Well, if I told you 6 months ago that the Dutch government is going to confiscate farms in 2023, you would have said, no, that's not going to happen. But they're doing it.
Yes.
I mean, months ago, we were cheering on the Dutch farmers who were bringing their tractors in to the city and shutting down the government and spreading manure on the government property, which I thought was hilarious. But now, Doc, the agenda has really come out in the open. Oh, we're just going to tell you what we plan to do.
We're shutting down farming.
We're taking your farms from you. Here's the money. If you don't take the money, we're taking it. Which one do you want? How many of these farmers are going to give in?
Well, based upon what I'm seeing in the Netherlands right now, these farmers are very, vocal and very active.
They say they're forcing us to the place that we have to fight for the right to exist.
Yes.
That's where they're bringing.
And if you think it's limited to the Netherlands, it's coming here. There are states considering legislation now to tax your cows. Or
It's already happened in New Zealand.
Right.
You know Canada will go this way.
Right.
So they're making farming illegal.
And so there's going to be coming a time where you won't be able to order a Big Mac at McDonald's. You'd have to order a McCricket burger or something like that. Because they're going to eliminate cows. Cows are the enemy. Remember? Because they're going to destroy the atmosphere. Remember, it was cars in the past. Now it's going to be cows. We got to get rid of those cows. Cows are going to kill us all.
And someday we'll be
cows
humans.
fart.
Someday it will be humans.
Right. We're going to have to control their methane emissions too. So the whole idea is to control us. Now, it goes on in this article to say for agriculture entrepreneurs, there will be a stopping scheme that will be as attractive as possible.
A stopping scheme.
And that was said by Van der Waal in a series of parliamentary briefings. This is the first time the Dutch government has committed to a controversial mandatory buyout or expropriation scheme after it was first mentioned in a government research report outlining, look at this number, a 30% livestock reduction by 2030. 30%, just in the Netherlands.
So when is the 100% reduction of livestock? What year is it? 2040, 2050?
You know,
where
they
there's
have
no
a plan
livestock
for it.
Anywhere in the world.
You know they have a plan for that.
Think where they're going is a world without livestock.
Yes. Well, sort of. We become the livestock.
All right.
So.
But there'll be no cattle, no sheep, no hogs, nothing.
Yes.
And they'll eventually eliminate most animals.
And then there's only one animal left to further eliminate, and that's us.
So what is happening? Satan is eliminating creation.
Yes. And
He
then
hates creation.
And then whatever creation is still remaining has been manipulated at the DNA level.
Yes. The transhumanism will be in full force in the next 10 years because people have already started allowing the government to inject operating systems into their bodies to change their humanity so that they become something that God did not create.
Right.
Satan, I believe, has been turned loose from the abyss. I really believe it. I can't come up with any other explanation for the explosion of evil and wickedness. There's just no other explanation. Satan has walked out of the abyss. Doc, I go back, what was it, 2016? Remember the tunnel?
Yeah.
In Europe? Remember that bizarre occult ceremony that they had? And we said then, they're calling Satan.
Right. They were dancing and doing satanic dances.
They were going back into that tunnel.
The Gothard Tunnel.
Gothard, yes.
Yes.
And we said then, they're calling out to Satan, come out.
And that was one of the first times we started getting shut down by various outlets. Remember that?
That's right.
When we started, talking about the Gothard Tunnel. And look, it's satanic dancers here inviting the devil to come out of the mountain. That's exactly what they were doing, Rick.
You better believe it.
So,
let's go down to 47, and then we'll go home for the day. We mentioned this one yesterday. This is number 38, and this is a New York Post. Yoel Roth, ex-Twitter executive. This was the guy that was in charge of censoring everybody at Twitter. Gay, Jewish, Nazi, fascist, totalitarian, who had this enormous power to deplatform people.
right.
Okay? So he and his boyfriend fled their home after Elon Musk released some internal documents.
Right, Rick. New York Post is reporting that Twitter's former head of trust and safety was reportedly forced to flee his home due to rapidly intensifying threats from Elon Musk and his supporters. Yoel Roth, who resigned from Twitter in November, and his family left their Bay Area home this weekend over safety concerns, spurred in part by the release of the Twitter files. Now, Roth has faced mounting threats following the release of the site's internal documents, which only intensified over the weekend when Musk misrepresented Roth's academic writing in a tweet, baselessly claiming Roth has a favorable view of pedophilia.
Gosh, even the New York Post can't
admit
that these people endorse pedophilia.
And this is what Elon Musk had to say about Yoel Roth. It says, looks like Yoel is arguing in favor of children being able to access adult internet services in his PhD thesis. And Mr. Musk tweeted this Saturday with a screenshot of Roth's dissertation. and that's reported by the Washington Post. So this is the tweet here, and he has done a screenshot of a portion of Ross' PhD thesis. Now, I'll read it here so you can see that there's no question about it, but it's worth considering how, if at all, the current generation of popular sites of gay networked sociability might fit into an overall queer social landscape that increasingly includes individuals under the age of 18. Even with the service's extensive content management, Grindr may well be too lewd or too hookup oriented to be a safe and age appropriate resource for teenagers. But the fact that people under 18 are on these services already indicates that we can't readily dismiss these platforms out of hand as loci for queer youth culture. Rather than merely trying to absolve themselves of legal responsibility, or worse, trying to drive out teenagers entirely, service providers should instead focus on crafting safety strategies that can accommodate a wide variety of use cases for platforms like Grindr, including possibly their role in safely connecting queer young adults.
So his solution was Grindr and these other gay dating apps were to create a safe zone inside the app for teenagers.
Yes.
Until they were 18, and then they could be turned loose in the whole Grindr app.
In spite of the fact, knowing that there would be predators within those environments that would take advantage of those teenagers that are in those social platforms. And so this man, Yoel Roth, his PhD dissertation, actively promoted the idea of using these sexually oriented social media platforms to lure in teenagers.
But he canceled us.
Yes.
I mean, permanently ended TruNews on Twitter because we tweeted an Irish newspaper article about people dying suddenly. And we asked the question, is it connected to the vaccines? That, in his mind, was so dangerous. Twitter had to take action immediately and shut down TruNews. But this guy says
it's okay if teenagers...
Children should be able to use queer dating apps.
Yes.
That's responsible behavior in his mind. I'm glad Elon Musk fired him. I'm glad he's cleaned house. And so this guy and his boyfriend had to flee their mansion because people are outraged at what this guy was advocating.
And they never make mention of what the actual threats were. Right. They said threats by Elon Musk and his supporters. Right. They didn't say that there was any violent threats. Right. Didn't say that, well, someone threatened to firebomb our house, right, or something along those lines. No, to them, the threats are just the words that were spoken. They have never been challenged in their domain.
Never been challenged. One more involving Elon Musk. I saw this today. Musk drags Twitter down a dangerous rabbit hole.
Now, this is an interesting story here. When Elton John announced last week that he was leaving Twitter because of its handling of misinformation, he got a reply from Elon Musk himself. He said, "I love your music," Musk tweeted. "Is there any misinformation in particular that you're concerned about?" Now, the singer didn't reply, but instead, Musk provided an answer himself 2 days later. In one short tweet, Mr. Musk signaled his support for, now remember, this is Washington Post saying this, for widespread anti-vaccine conspiracy theory, sometimes referred to as Nuremberg 2.0, after the post-World War II trials of Nazis, that pushes the notion that world leaders, scientists, and journalists will be put on trial for their role in engineering a false pandemic.
Well, let me remind everybody that yesterday the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, petitioned the Florida Supreme Court to impanel a statewide grand jury to investigate those very allegations that there was a conspiracy to introduce vaccines that were not safe.
That's right.
And so it's not a conspiracy theory. in the state of Florida, there's going to be a grand
Conspiracy.
jury
Yeah.
looking into this conspiracy.
A conspiracy investigation. Now, the Washington Post went on to say this is an absurd theory made more serious by dissuading vulnerable people from getting COVID-19 vaccines, and one likely to flourish on Twitter after the site dropped its COVID misinformation policy last month. That's the rule change that likely sparked Elton John's decision to leave. There was another tweet that Elon Musk put out there, and he did this a couple days ago, and this is kind of one of the clues that they make. Now they're trying to tie him to QAnon with this, follow the white rabbit.
Okay,
In other
so
words,
I don't understand that. So
in
what
other
does
words,
that mean?
going down the rabbit hole, like in Alice in Wonderland,
Right, okay.
going down the rabbit hole and everything, and you're going to discover all sorts of things once you go down the rabbit hole. So he says, follow the white rabbit. And so, to me, what that means is that there's more coming, a lot more coming. So get ready. The biggest stuff is still on its way.
Okay, so we just read what the Washington Post said about these so-called anti-vax conspiracy theories and Nuremberg trials. I want to jump down for the ending of today's True News. Guys, let's go down to number 75. And this came out this afternoon. This is a National Review. The Washington Post, the very newspaper we're talking about,
Yes.
today announced layoffs after hemorrhaging subscribers throughout 2022.
So the Washington Post is expected to execute more layoffs in the new year after suffering a massive loss of subscribers in 2022. Publisher Fred Ryan announced the dismissals at a company town hall Wednesday. Washington Post national correspondent Annie Goen reported that Ryan darted out of the room without taking questions from staff after he broke the news. You talked about the positions getting eliminated. What are you doing to protect people's jobs? Roughly.
What?
Yes.
The CEO announced there's going to be massive layoffs, and one of the Washington Post reporters says, what are you doing to protect people's jobs?
Yes.
Who says something like that when the layoffs have been?
Right.
It just shows the
Arrogance.
arrogance and the lack of reality in these snowflakes.
The sense of entitlement.
They've never been through a financial downturn.
Right.
And all they've known is entitlement, and they don't work.
Participation ribbons and everything.
Yes,
So,
and they're paid to be activists. They're paid to be reputation assassins. They're paid to be propagandists. What do you mean you're laying us off?
what are you doing to help me keep my job?
I'm a propagandist. Who's going to spread propaganda if I'm not here? They don't know what to do. So we've got a video of the meeting today where the Washington Post CEO announced the layoffs. Let's watch.
We're not going to turn the town hall into a grievance session for the I'm sorry.
Ask the question.
Brad, you talked about positions getting eliminated. What are you going to do to protect people's jobs? Are they going to be treated like the magazine staffers were?
We'll have more information as we move forward. Thank you very much.
And how will your positions be decided?
You seem to be disrespecting this.
Well, we're not announcing any major layoffs here at True News.
No.
But the Washington Post has layoffs. CNN has layoffs. You can go down a long list of media outlets that are laying off their employees. What happened at Washington Post is that 500,000 subscribers deplatformed the Washington Post.
Right.
They're not used to this. Their customers are deplatforming them.
And they won't be profitable for this year. They've lost money. So.
And the recession is just starting.
That's right.
So there may not be a Washington Post by the end of next year.
So 2 weeks before Christmas, you get laid off, you get fired.
I'm not certain, Doc, that the Washington Post and CNN will still be in business 1 year from today.
You know, as we were preparing to come out here today, one of our staff, you know, we were talking to them about Twitter. You know, they dismissed nearly 3/4 of the staff, but guess what? Twitter's still working.
Sure does. How many people do you need to run an app that is instant messaging? How many people do you need?
And
It
how
pretty
many
much runs itself, doesn't it?
And how many useless positions are there at the Washington Post and you know, CNN, and so many things have been propped up. That's what propaganda is propped up news.
But I don't think the layoffs are going to solve the problem. I think these companies will be out of business by the end of next year. I believe that you're going to see some shocking news of media organizations that you thought were giants.
Yes.
And they're going to fall like Goliath in the coming year. Let God's judgment be upon these entities, all right? Don't be afraid of the downturn that's coming. You're going to prosper. If your life is in right standing with God and you're a giver, you're obedient to God, you're living the right life, you're going to prosper through this financial downturn. Amen. It'll be one of the best times of your life. You will be the head and not the tail. And there'll be opportunities after opportunities for the brave-hearted to seize and take advantage of the opportunities. So don't have a fear and apprehension about a financial downturn. You ought to be excited about it. God's people will thrive in the financial downturn. The wealth of the wicked is laid up for the just, and there will be a transfer of wealth to God's people. The ones who have faith, the ones who are in right standing with God, and they have faith, God will bless them in the coming years. So don't worry about it. Hey, one more thing. Let's see, coming up really, really soon.
This evening.
Tonight is our own Mike Rathke, who is departing our organization from the payroll to finally, praise God, go out and do what I believe God has called him to do, and that is to bless people with his music. Mike is an enormously talented young man, and he's worked here for us for what, Doc? 7 years? 7 years? I forget.
Yes.
You know, and he's been a fantastic member of our team, but all of us know that his real place is music ministry. And so we've been encouraging him, and he's stepping out. And so tonight, what was the time? 7:30. So right now, if you're watching me live, it's 6:21 live.
So about an hour from now.
7:30, he's going to stream his first folk opera, The Harlot and the Bride.
Right. Now, you can only watch this online, so the address that you need to put in it is MikeRathke.veeps, that's VEPS.com. MikeRathke.veeps, VEEPS.com. And so that starts in about an hour from now. So,
And I think it'll be available video on demand for 5 or 7 days.
Right.
All right, so watch it live tonight. It's coming up from these studios right here in Vero Beach. That's it for today. We love you very much. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for praying for us. And God bless. We will be back here, God willing, tomorrow, and we'll give you another update on what's going on in the world. The main thing that's going on is Jesus Christ is Lord and King, and he's coming back for his church. That's the main story. See you tomorrow.
Trailer court in Omaha, to a mother that was on the clock. My daddy was a wild man running the streets, made a living off of selling rock. By the time that I hit junior high, I was following my old man's steps, and I reached high school in the next LA.